Everybody's so quiet.
No, let's tense up, everyone. Let's take the fun out of this, yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Clinton Presidential Center presents What's Next? The Legacy of West Wing, held in conjunction with the Clinton Center's newest temporary exhibit, Commanding the Screen, the American Presidency in Film and Television. Clinton Presidential Center presents is a partnership between the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton School of Public Service at the University of Arkansas, and the Clinton Presidential Library. I'm Stephanie Sims, Supervisory Museum Curator for the William J. Clinton Presidential Library and Museum. This month, we introduced a new and exclusive temporary exhibit entitled Commanding the Screen, the American Presidency in Film and Television. This unique exhibit offers a rare opportunity for visitors to explore cinematic portrayals of fictional and real-life presidents and learn how these depictions reflect America's spirit, values, and historical journey. The exhibit features original costumes, authentic props, and other memorabilia seen on screen, bringing the American presidency to life. Tonight's program will include a conversation with the West Wing actors Melissa Fitzgerald and Mary McCormack, who have recently released their book, What's Next? A Backstage Pass to the West Wing, its cast and crew, and its enduring legacy of service. What's Next provides readers with on-set and off-camera anecdotes, including behind-the-scenes information that even the West Wing superfans may not have heard before. We are deeply honored to have our esteemed panelists with us tonight, Melissa Fitzgerald, an activist. Yes, I read your Instagram. Who starred in the television series Frequency and Grey's Anatomy, and is the Director of Strategic Engagement at All Rise Justice for Vets. And Mary McCormack, a versatile actor known for her roles in the television series In Plain Sight and the film Deep Impact, which is also an exhibit. As you're here, both Melissa and Mary showed their talents in the West Wing as well. Their discussion will focus on the show's impact on American culture, government, and civic life, emphasizing how the series portrayed a politics of decency and honor, presenting an ideal White House beyond fictional television. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge Stephanie Street, our Executive Director of the Clinton Foundation, and tonight's moderator, Dr. Jay Barth, Director of the William J. Clinton Presidential Library and Museum. We are sincerely thankful for your participation in tonight's event. We hope you find tonight's conversation informative and enjoyable. Thank you.
And I want to thank Stephanie and her team, as well as our partners at the Clinton Foundation for all of their work in developing the temporary exhibit. And I, of course, encourage all of you to check it out and come back again and again to see what is going to be an exhibit that likely evolves a little bit, especially with the show that we're talking about tonight, because the West Wing, it is its 25th anniversary, and there's been a lot of exhibitions around the country dedicated to West Wing, and so we're about to get some of those artifacts as well, we very much hope. So welcome to you both. Really thrilled that y'all are here at the Clinton Center, and each of y'all acted in the series, as Stephanie said, and so let's start by talking a little bit about your roles on the West Wing. And Melissa, do you want to talk a little bit about your time on the West Wing, just to remind the audience?
Sure. I played Carol, CJ's assistant, for 7 years, and I started off as staffer number something. I think I had one line in the pilot, and then over time it evolved, and I got a desk, and then I got a first name, and then eventually I got a last name. And it was just an honor and a real privilege to get to be part of that show and to work for CJ, played by the great Allison Janney.
Indeed. Fantastic.
I played Commander Harper. I was the Deputy National Security Advisor, and I showed up much later. Oh, I'm late to every good party. It's so true. I wish that weren't true, but it is true. Anyway, I was just happy to be there because I was a wingnut, a massive fan of the show. So when I got the call to join the show, it was like a dream come true. So I was really excited to come and play a sort of mysterious, strong, cool character. I mean, every time I would open a script, I was speaking a new language. I was like, who is she? That's one of the fun things about TV. Unlike a film or a play, where you know the ending, and you sort of know everything there is to know about your character. In television, you can open a script one week, and you're like, oh, I'm the killer. That's really odd. So that was fun. I love that part of Kate.
Yeah. And what season did you come in?
5.
But it's hard to believe that you weren't there the whole time because Mary is such an important part of, I think, all of our experiences on the show. And as our friend group, Mary is a key part of that. And I can't imagine
bossy.
it without you. And very bossy, as am I.
So Mary, of course, both of you can answer this, but Mary, how did this book come to be? How did this book get envisioned? And then how did y'all work collaboratively, I guess some of it during a pandemic, in developing this book?
Well, I should let you tell this, because Melissa was approached to write a Backstage Pass to the West Wing, a Backstage book. Go ahead.
Okay, and then you'll jump in when you come in. So I was approached by Kevin Walling, who's here somewhere. We call the godfather of What's Next. But he said, my book agents would love for you to write a behind the scenes of the West Wing book. And I said, that's not really my book to write. I had a small part in the show. And also, I left Hollywood to champion a cause. I work for an organization called All Rise. And everything I do has to elevate the work that we do and also, you know, service in general. So I said, if they would be interested in a West Wing service book, that's something I could get behind. And then I went out to Los Angeles for Allison Janney's birthday party, November 2019. And Mary and I were having a piece of cake.
After many drinks. I think we were overserved. I know we were
blame
overserved.
Allison.
Yeah, Allison Janney overserved us, and then next thing you know, we're writing a book. Crazy.
Well, yes, and Mary's husband warned us that he said, he was standing there saying, you guys, it's gonna be a lot of work. And we're like, no, we'll do it. 5 years later, here we are.
And you did it across the country, right? I mean,
Yeah, it was COVID when we started. Selling the book was really fun. That part, I can't recommend enough. Definitely pitch a book and sell it, because that part was exciting, right?
Only 12-page proposal.
Yeah,
and then,
but really
you know,
fun, because
Zooms.
everyone seems to love the West Wing. That was thrilling. And then we had to write it, and we were like, uh-oh.
That got real.
Yeah, but it was COVID, so we started, we were all Zooming anyway. You know, everyone was Zooming, so we just started doing hundreds of Zoom interviews with cast and crew, background actors, everyone, writers, producers, everybody.
It's a really interview, like in terms of the process, it was an interview-driven book. I mean, we originally set out to write about a 300-page book, The West Wing and Service, and it ended up being close to 600 because we kept interviewing people and we kept getting more exciting and interesting stories. Like, remember when Richard shared that one story with us about the pilot? We thought, we gotta put this in. And the book kept getting longer and longer and longer. But I mean, I think the exciting thing is we had such, if you want to talk about this, the access that we had, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the things that separates our book from other TV sort of fan books, is that we were in the cast. So there is crazy access. For example, the casting director, who's fantastic, he was like, oh, sure, I'll just send over the binders. I was like, all right. And there were like 3 massive binders, and it was everyone they saw for every part, all their feedback on their reads, their deal memos. I was like, what are we looking at? I shouldn't be seeing this.
I know. And
crazy.
we saw one really fun thing about Mary.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. We put a picture of it in the book, actually.
Yeah.
It says my name. I didn't remember this, but we got all of a sudden in one of those binders I see my name, and it said Mary McCormack, not interested in series television. I'm late to every good party.
But you showed up.
Better late than never.
that's great. So this show was not a natural fit for television. It was an odd show. So let's talk a little bit about the origin story and the difficult process of getting this show on the air, and then especially on network television, because it was not a natural fit for network television. at that time in the late 1990s. So talk a little bit about.
There was only network television then, really. I mean, The Sopranos was sort of started.
there was a little bit of cable, but also
Just starting.
a political show had never been successful on television before, ever. So
They stopped making them, in fact. They wouldn't even make it. But John Wells, I think, had a different level of...
yeah, who was the producer at ER and had a deal at Warner Brothers, and you know, and then Aaron Sorkin's ridiculous script. And it took over a year, because I remember reading both the Sports Night and the West Wing script at the same time. And I remember, you know, I've said this before, but reading the Sports Night script, I said, this is going to be the best show on television. And then the West Wing script will be the best show ever on television. And I stand by it. And, but I think that, you know, my naivete, I thought this will definitely be on television. And it did take a year, because, I mean, we talk about it a lot in What's Next, but it was a journey to get it on television, because political shows had always been unsuccessful in the past. And I think the climate in the country, it was a difficult time, and people were afraid that people wouldn't tune into that, but they did.
Yeah, and there was a lot of investment in it early on. I mean, this was more like a feature film, right, in terms of the amount of investment in the sets and everything. I mean, it was a huge operation from the get-go. So a lot of folks were taking a lot of risks on the show, making it in an atmosphere where it probably wasn't supposed to make it, which I think was very, very interesting in terms of y'all's telling
That's
that
true.
story.
Yeah, I don't know the answer for that. I think that must have to do with the combination of Aaron Sorkin and John Wells. John having
And
such
Peter Roth,
success, and
too.
Peter Roth loving it.
And Scott Sasso, I think, at the time,
Yeah,
too.
loving it. That was like a perfect storm of the right people loving the material.
Yeah. So you've already mentioned the casting decisions, that y'all had a lot of access to that. And a significant chunk of the book is dedicated to those casting decisions. And we'll talk more about the casting of Martin Sheen as President Bartlet in a minute. But y'all talk through a number of the key casting decisions, you know, from Allison Janney as C.J. Craig to Dooley Hill as Charlie Young. And I'd love each of you to talk through one of the casting decisions that you think is particularly interesting and became particularly important in terms of the show clicking. And I think y'all can go a lot of different directions.
I think Richard Schiff's story is really interesting, just because Richard is sort of like Eeyore, you know, he's always sort of grumpy.
Yeah.
It's built in. I mean, I would say it if he were here.
Yeah.
Played Toby.
Yeah, he played Toby, yeah. And he, you know, didn't want to do TV really, but showed up at the audition and had a reputation for not coming to the final stage of the audition, which they call the test. And he got to that stage, and I think it was Tommy Schlamme, the producing director, who just looked at him and said, "I really hope you come back." And he did come back, and it's like scary to think that he wouldn't have, you know, and Richard did that. Like he really, I think, did it a number of times and had a reputation for it. Like he just really...
He shared that with us too. I think he said Tommy put his hand on his shoulder and like looked him right in the eye and said that.
Yeah.
And I think that meant a lot to Richard. And he saw Allison Janney in the waiting room. And he said, if they cast her, they know what they're doing, like something like that. And so
he knew her work, and she had really mostly done plays up until that point, small parts in films, but
and Primary
lots of
Colors,
theater.
she was in that and just was brilliant.
Yeah, but when he saw her, he thought, well, maybe they're making something good. Yeah.
Yeah. And is there one that stands out for you?
My own.
Yeah.
Smart.
We'll talk about it.
Well, no, it just changed my life. Completely changed my life. I mean, I'm part of a family of friends that has been, you know, we've been together for 25 years. And first of all, professionally, obviously, it was a great opportunity, but personally, it has been the biggest gift. And, you know, I wouldn't have Mary in my life. I wouldn't have Alice and Janelle. I'm Janelle's son's godmother. And, you know, Richard and Dulé, and obviously Allison and
Brad,
who's in Budapest.
we're really close. It's gross.
Yeah. I mean, it is like family, and we're, you know.
We're on a text chain all day long. It's
Yeah.
weird.
And Josh Molina, we can't forget Josh.
Yeah. Well, we can.
You can.
So, I mean, is that kind of camaraderie normal at all?
Oh, and hold on, I'm so sorry. Martin! Martin's not on our text chain because he doesn't really do the cell phone. But, but Martin is like a second.
He's the captain.
Yeah, he's like the second father to us. And the work that I do now at All Rise is because of Martin. He brought me, gosh, I think 12, 13 years ago to their conference. I lost a dear friend to addiction, and Martin said, I'm going to speak at this conference in DC. Will you come with me? Because he knew, and I went with him, and it really changed the course of my life.
Mm-hmm. So is that kind of camaraderie, is it common at all in?
No,
in
I mean, I've done a
classes?
ton of jobs. I'm 1,000 years old now, and you don't, sometimes you
really
make
good.
one friend, you know, a good friend, but never like this. Really unusual.
So let's talk about the casting decision that seems super obvious now. And that is, of course, Martin Sheen as President Josiah Bartlet. And this wasn't inevitable. The vision of the president's role in the series was not yet fully established. Lots of other names get considered, some really interesting names. Could y'all talk a bit about that whole process? And I guess, but because of some of the materials you got access to, you have a lot of insight into.
Wish we
that
could have put
process.
all, we did in the book put some of the casting, the idea lists, but there's so many more.
And there's so, think about like a James Carville as Bartlett.
I know,
He
but
was
some
on
of them are crazy.
George Steinbrenner.
I mean, I think my mom was on one of the lists. Like, it's not, the lists they're crazy brainstorm
Yeah.
sessions.
And
Yeah.
Hal Holbrook was President Bartlett for 12 hours, I think, or 16 hours. And then, you know, they brought him back in another role. But
But the part wasn't meant to be that part. It was really going to be just a tiny, tiny role. It was really, the show was conceived to focus on the staff, not the president. And then when Martin Sheen showed up, everyone's like, more of him, please.
And Martin said, the last shot of the pilot, he said, you know, we put it in What's Next, too, but he said, you know, in the Oval Office in that final scene, and he said, people are want to know more about what goes on in that office. And so he had a sense that he'd be coming back more.
And there were conversations about diversifying the president in some ways. Obviously, that's before there is a black president, but there were several
Sidney
candid-
Poitier was on the, lots
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
people.
Colin Powell, a lot of non-actors.
Women, there was a women's list.
Yeah. So
Crazy.
So let's talk about, because y'all obviously worked with Martin, continue to work with him now in a variety of ways. Just talk a bit about the magic he brought to the cast and the way in which he continues to bring kind of magic to the family that continues to exist.
I think for both of us and the rest of our friend group, he really is sort of what we all aspire, certainly I'll speak for myself, but what I aspire to be like. And I often think when I'm, you know, thinking about a decision or how I'm going to behave in a certain sense, I always look to Martin, like what would Martin do? What kind of decision would Martin make? He really is as good as you think he is, and then some. He is an amazing human being. And I don't think I've ever met anybody like him. And I just feel so lucky to have him in our
Tell
lives.
the story, though, Melissa, of the pilot when you first saw him working, because we used it in our book proposal because it was such a formative memory for Melissa and speaks to who he is.
We were doing a scene, it was, you know, one of my first scenes, and there were a lot of background artists in that scene. And Martin even said the other
People used to call them extras. Now they're background artists, just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
We have to
And
all
Martin
be on the
even
same
said
page.
the other day, because he came and promoted our book with us for a whole week. He and Janet, his wife, stayed for a whole week in DC to help us with this. And he said, oh, I don't like that term extra. I like background, you know? So there were a lot of background artists in the scene, and Martin comes on to set, and you know, it's time to go, and I see the producers looking at their watches as Martin shakes the hand of each and every background artist and introduces himself and engages in a conversation with each and every one. And I remember standing there thinking, like, oh gosh, what's going on here? What's going on? You know, looking at the producers, looking at their watches. And then I thought, he's teaching all of us how this is going to go down from here on out, that this is going to be a place where people come first, where everybody, no matter what their role, is going to be treated with dignity and respect. And I think that was pervasive. And luckily, you know, the producers were all like that too. Like everybody was on board with that. And then, you know, oftentimes background will eat in a different location than the rest of the cast and the crew.
On every show.
Yeah. And Martin insisted that there's one place where we all eat together, because he said, families eat together.
Well done. So the goal of this book is not to walk through every episode, because that would have been exhausting and you'd still be working on it. Instead, you do pick key episodes that are particularly telling and important in terms of the flow of the show, the trajectory of the show. So maybe each of you kind of pick an episode that you do write about in the book, or maybe one that got left out that you think is really important, and talk through why it was important, why it was such a vital moment in the life of the show.
I mean, most people say, there's a bunch that come up when you ask people their favorite. In Excelsis Deo, it's hard to ignore. I mean, Richard Schiff's
And could you talk just 2
talent.
seconds about the plot?
Yeah, well, just about, I mean, you know, dealing with veterans issues. It's also so personal for us and things we care about. And I don't know, I mean, I think the writing in that is like sublime. You know, that's Aaron at his best, I think. I don't know. What's one of your favorites?
I mean, I love that episode.
That one's hard to beat.
Yeah, I love the scene in the Oval Office at the end where he and Martin are Toby and the president are speaking about, you know, taking care of our veterans, basically, and that the enormous debt that we as Americans owe them, and how they sacrifice so much for us and ask for so little in return. I just love that episode so much. And I also just have to acknowledge Mary has been a tremendous support of the work that we do on behalf of veterans and veterans treatment courts. She's been a real rock star, and she's from a veteran family. So.
Easy to get behind that issue, yeah.
But
For everyone.
that one, and then, you know, there's so many. I love all of
Shibboleth.
them.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's so hard to choose.
Shibboleth and Take This Sabbath Day with Carl Malden, that beautiful scene in the Oval.
Carl Malden.
I don't know, I feel like you should tell the story about your dad.
Well, that's not really appropriate.
I don't know, it's funny.
I broke my nose in 9th grade, and my dad called me Carl Malden for like 3 years straight. He would be like, Carl, dinner.
Sorry, I know it was
That's
off
not
track.
fair to Carl
but-
Malden's memory, who is sublime
Yeah.
in the show.
And also, the Bible that he used in that scene was the Bible from On the Waterfront. He brought that to the West Wing and used it in that scene. And I think it's also the last thing he ever did was that episode.
Wow, very good, very good. So we have audience members who have asked questions, those in the room and those who are watching virtually. And one of them had a question about the humor of the show and the degree to which it was fully scripted or was at points improvised by the cast. And could you talk a little bit about the role of the humor, and if there's a humorous moment or two that really stand out to you as being good examples of the way humor worked in the show?
Yeah, so a lot of people who love the show and love Aaron's writing in general already know this, but you don't improvise any words, even breaths. I mean, it's almost all written, scored, and you would never, and that continued even after Aaron left. That was the sort of mission statement of the show. And you didn't need to, because it was so beautifully written. You know, it's not, you didn't need to naturalize it. In fact, I think Aaron answered this recently at an event, and I'm going to butcher it. But the spirit of it was, he was saying, like, it's not that I'm precious. It's not that I think my words can't be better or naturalized. Like some things are beautiful naturalized when you add I means and, if you know, sort of grunting and all that stuff. He said, I just hear things musically. He was like, I hear it, And if you change anything, the music is sort of broken. And it made sense, you know? That's just
Absolutely.
how he writes. That's his style.
And Dulé talked about that too a little bit, because Dulé obviously is a dancer and a singer, and he said it really is like music. And that's a theme that comes up in our book quite a bit too, is the musicality of his writing. But we had on set someone whose specific job it was to make sure that people were letter perfect.
But one of my favorite funny lines, although I don't know if it was meant to be funny, but Brad Whitford, who played Josh Lyman, and Josh Molina, who played Will Bailey, have a lot of you probably know this too, but a years-long, like ridiculously volatile prank war with each other. They love-hate each other. And Brad wrote one of the episodes, and he wrote a line for Josh to say, "I'm a terrible actor, I can't act." And that made everyone so happy.
That's great. So this show began to air late in the Clinton administration, and then most of its time on the air, of course, was in the George W. Bush era. And could y'all talk a little bit about the relationship between the show and the political context in which it was playing out, was being written, was being acted, was being received by audiences?
You know, I think that would be an amazing question for Aaron if he were here too. But, you know, from my perspective, it was just interesting. A lot of people came to the show. You know, a lot of people who were Democrats came to the show during the Bush years as, you know, looking at it and saying, this was the White House we wish that we were having. I just remember that being a pretty common theme at that time. But, you know, I do think that it was a politics where even though people could disagree, everybody was there working on behalf of the American people, whether they were Republicans or Democrats. And it didn't seem that
It was different then.
and it wasn't too. Like I mean, it was and it wasn't. There were, you know, those were some dark days too in terms of working together across the aisle. So I think that's interesting to see it as maybe something aspirational then and really now too.
I do know though that when we would often, every season we would go to Washington to shoot exterior shots, and in the years that I was there, the cast would be like, it was different when the other administration was, like our access was totally different. Like we went from shooting, you know, at the best like incredible access to like outside the mall. And I don't mean the mall, I meant like an actual mall.
And you
Late
did,
to every party.
and a lot of folks who had been involved in politics do get involved in the show, right? I mean,
Dee Dee Myers,
Dee Dee
I saw
Myers,
her picture there,
yeah.
and she was a consultant, and I think CJ was probably, you know, was modeled on her a bit.
Yeah, and she was not alone. There were others.
Gene Sperling and a whole bunch of others.
Yeah, and so it was, in some ways, the interplay between the politics of that era and the show was pretty intimate at times. So season 4 is a big turning point for the show. Aaron Sorkin and his co-creator Tony Shalhoub, who was mentioned earlier, they leave the show, and that was somewhat unexpected by some involved with the show. Would you agree?
Certainly, it was unexpected to me because I had a small part on the show, and I was very surprised by that.
I think the whole cast was surprised.
Yeah. And so how did that change the show? How did the shift in leadership of the show, how did it alter the show, either in terms of kind of how the cast worked together, how the trajectory of the storyline changed, how the writing changed, because obviously you have a very precise writer, and then suddenly that person is gone. How does it alter the experience?
Well, why don't I just tell the end of that era, and you can take it from, when you came on board, because I think that was important timing. But sort of at the end of it, I remember we were all scared that it wouldn't be able to, without Aaron, continue. And I think, it had been, for most of us, the best experiences of our lives, and that was a very sad and, scary time. And then But John Wells, I remember, really assured all of us that it would continue. And in his hands, obviously it did.
Yeah, John was there from the beginning, though, I think that continuity helped quite a bit. And John Wells is also an excellent writer and a brilliant director. And so I think one of the best showrunners to have ever done the job. So I think it was that part, the scaffolding was strong.
And Aaron had created such strong characters and structure.
Yeah, and some of the writers stayed, so there was some continuity, I think, which helped quite a bit.
Yeah. So soon thereafter, there is this season centered around the electoral battle, right, between on who would replace President Bartlet. And Jimmy Smits and Alan Alda faced off in this really great fictionalized version of an election. There was actually a lot of back and forth about who should win that election. That was not a done deal. Who was going to win? Obviously, no. I think we all know Jimmy Smits wins, but that was not a done deal. And so, talk a little bit about that part of the show. Y'all were both there during that period. How did that play out? How was that? How did that feel while you were working on the election part? Because there had been all this time working on the life in the White House, and then it suddenly becomes an electoral show.
That part of the show was so tainted by John Spencer's passing for us. That for me, it's a little bit of a blur, that whole period, because so much of it felt like about John, and we talk about this in the book, but Vinnick was supposed to win, and that was what was planned. And then when John passed, I think John Wells said he just thought it was too much for the audience to lose John Spencer and
the election.
And the election.
And talk about John Spencer's passing, which was obviously deeply affected the cast, but talk about it, how it impacted the storyline as well, for those who haven't watched it in a while.
Well, it changed the winner of the election. Santos won, and so it really did change the whole rest of the show. And I think, if there was any thought that the show could continue past the election, I think John Spencer's passing sort of put an end to those thoughts. It just didn't feel, I think, to most people like the right thing after that.
Yeah, he was a huge loss for obviously, it's like words don't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was hard.
And that really comes through in the book.
He was so loved. And such a huge, he and Martin were like the parents of all of us, really, and the show. Yeah. We all looked to them.
And the cast obviously had to live it out very personally, but then had to relive it in the story, right? I mean,
and it was it was shot very close to the reality of what happened, and many of us went to. There was a funeral in New Jersey and another memorial in Los Angeles, and then filming it. Stockard Channing, in her interview with us for our book, talks about that and how challenging that was.
Yeah. So, big chunk of the book is about the legacy of this series and the ways in which it continues to live on. And I want to talk about something that y'all do. That is very much a part of the book. I think it may have even been more central to the original book vision, and that is that you spend a chunk of this book dedicated to the nonprofit and advocacy work that y'all and the other cast members are committed to now. And I'm curious why y'all made that decision. I mean, down to really giving email or websites of those organizations. That's a big part of this story here, and could you talk a little bit about that and why you think this show helped produce and promote that kind of activism?
We meet people every single day who go, I'm doing this work because of the West Wing. I mean, like Melissa, even more so because she lives in Washington doing this work. I mean, committed to service. But we meet people all the time, so that the legacy is such a gift, to get to sort of hear from people about all the good work they're doing, because of this show. And then we felt, I think, as a cast, you feel so lucky. Listen, as an actor, you get asked to do a lot of things. You have a chance to sort of show up and help, just simply based on our dumb job. And so it feels like a real honor to get to do that. We tell a story where Anthony Edwards, who played a doctor on ER, is friends with Brad Whitford. And when Brad shot the pilot, he said to Brad, "You're about to get a lot of capital. You can spend it on yourself, or you can spend it on other people." And I think that was a formative memory for Brad. And boy, does he walk the walk,
And
we're
Martin,
so lucky to get to do it. Yeah, and Martin.
And I think because it was specifically the West Wing, we got even more opportunities to get involved in different things. And for the two of us, service is such an important part of our lives. And it's also, for the whole cast, it's a really central part of our friendship. Like, our text chain, in addition to making fun of Josh Molina, is also us asking each other to show up for a fundraiser, or Mary coming to my conference and Martin coming to my conference.
Everybody. I asked Josh Molina to co-host a JDRF benefit with me, and he said he couldn't do it. And he emailed me back. He said, "This is awkward. I'm pro-diabetes." And I read that email at the gala, and they did not think it was as funny.
But it's the through line of our friendships, and I think we keep getting back together, supporting each other's issues and causes. So, and Mary and I felt like that was the book that we wanted to write, and that was the book that was appropriate for us to write. So it was always part of the book. It was never an add-on.
And then we thought we'd weave it through, so it never felt like, the fun, the juicy stuff, and then the service stuff.
Yeah, we didn't want to put it
juicy
together in a chapter because we thought people might skip over that chapter on service.
Yeah, but it's fun to hear about what Alice and Janney's passionate about, and I think it's actually really.
No, I think y'all did that piece just
good.
beautifully. I thought it was really, and I did learn a lot about these actors as people, right? Through their, because we see who people are through the choices they make about how they spend their time, right? And I think that was very, very well done, and a great celebration of this spirit. So we've already mentioned it a little bit. There are these people called wingnuts, and they're not. It's not a small number. And then you have other folks who just, this is their go-to binge. If they need a show to watch and don't have anything else in the queue. Why does it have such staying power a quarter of a century later? I mean, there are a lot of great shows from that era of television, because it was a really good era on television that don't have that same power. What is it about this show that has that such a
I have 3 teenage daughters, and they're all finding it. And I'm meeting young people all the time who are finding the show on Max, and it's still relevant, and I think it's hopeful. It's been said it's too. Is it Pollyanna-ish? Is it too optimistic? Is it? Those are some criticisms, but I think some of that feels good. It's a tonic. It's an antidote to the despair that sometimes politics dishes out to us. I think it feels good. It's nice to sort of remember that some people are in politics and service to do the most good for the most people. That's a nice thing to sort of revisit.
And I think it's true. I mean, I've met so many people in the work that I do now and in my whole growing up that work for the government, and they are good people trying to do the most good for the most people. And I think it's important to portray that, and it's important that we understand that our government is us. It is a representation of us. It is what is being done in our names, and connecting what's happening, like we were talking about it earlier, a policy to how it impacts your life. And that does get talked about on the show.
Also, some of the issues, most of them are still around and not fixed, right? The environment, gun control, it's all still, so my kids can watch it and understand it and be worried about it too.
And then, of course, the unreasonable talent of Aaron Sorkin. I mean, I think that's part of the staying power. You can't separate that out. And then sort of the other pieces, Tommy Schlamme and Martin, Allison, everybody.
Yeah. But we did get questions, there are a whole series of questions about this issue of the hopefulness, the idealism of the show. And there were a couple of questions from audience members who really ask, is this an unattainable fantasy? And does it potentially have some damaging effects in terms of how people see the politics of the lives they're living? Is that there's too much of a disconnect between how good these people are and how good they are in terms of the public service they do and real politics. Is there any, do y'all have any sense there that there's any worry, or is it all good in terms of having an idealism that is a goal to be lived up to?
I mean, I know how I feel, but I can only speak for myself. I think it is good to see that. And I think that it's our job as voters to vote the government that we want. If we want that government, we vote for that government. We vote for people who are willing to work across the aisle, for people who have our best interest at heart, to know what their policies are and how that's going to impact our lives and the lives of people who are struggling more than we are. I think that's important too. And so I don't know if I am naive, but I am hopeful, certainly. But we live in a democracy, and our government can change every election cycle. So that is up to us. We have all the power.
I do think there is, obviously we're living in a more divisive time. I mean, that's undeniable. Aaron answered this question recently and said the reason the West Wing couldn't be on the air now is that there are no, what did he say? I don't want to get it wrong. Something about, not there are no, but maybe there are no reasonable Republicans. It may have been
I can't remember his exact words, but he was quoted. It's in the paper. You can Google it.
Yeah. But I understand what he's, that sense of compromise is harder to find these days. It's still there, and some people are willing to do it. It's just harder to find.
But again, we have an election coming up.
Melissa's more hopeful than I am. You can tell.
So we did get, one of our viewers tonight is actually in the UK and had an interesting question and noted just how popular this show is abroad. And it's obviously set in the United States. Almost all of it happens in the United States. Why do you think it is popular in other countries?
Maybe it's the America they hope is out there, It's like wish fulfillment, maybe. And also, Aaron just writes a great story. Good TV is good TV. Yeah. It's good storytelling.
Yeah. What she said.
Yeah. So Aaron Sorkin said that the show was, quote, a love letter to public service. And you all include that pretty early in this book. Could you talk about the ways in which it is I love that quote, and I'd love you all to kind of grapple a little bit more than you already have with how it is a love letter to public service.
I think the same things that we said before about how it portrays people who are, the best and the brightest, who could be making tons of money at a private law firm or in a corporation, and they choose to work for very little money for the government and long hours, because they believe in making the country better for everyone, including those who are struggling. So I think that makes it a love letter. And we always talk about our book, about what's next. Like, if The West Wing is a love letter to public service, what's next is a love letter to the West Wing, the army of people it took to make it, the fans who loved it, and the people who were inspired by it. So I don't know, do you have anything?
No. You nailed it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So as we kind of near the end here, I do want to talk about another legacy of this show, and that's the way in which it has impact on a couple of entities, a couple of groups. One are other folks who are out in public service today, and y'all spend some time talking about the ways in which people whom we know are involved in politics and public service today really cite this show as being pretty formative for them. So I'd love for us to talk about that a little bit, and then after that, I'd love for us to talk a little bit about the way in which this show has threads to other key pop culture phenomena that also have ideals about public service that I think are pretty great. So maybe let's start with talking about some of the public servants of today who y'all do quote in the book as saying, this show really mattered to me when I was coming of age.
There's some great ones. I mean, Stacey Abrams is, is a total wingnut. Pete Buttigieg, the biggest wingnut. I mean, there's some great, and then to hear why they love it and how they found it, and it's just really exciting. When I was doing a show called In Plain Sight in New Mexico. I was playing a cop, a marshal, and I went to 3 days before President Obama was elected. I was at a rally at the University of New Mexico, and he was coming off the stage, and I was like, oh my God, he's coming our way, he's coming our way. And my husband and I were there, and I was like, I'm gonna get to shake his hand. This is incredible. And he comes down, and he looks up, and he went, oh, you're, and I was like, no. I was like, I'm really not the National Security Advisor. I'm a fake cop now. Like, I don't even have, I have a fake gun. I'm like a fake badge. Like, you're the next president of the United States in 24 hours. It was really exciting. And thank God my husband was there. So we have a picture of him going.
And it's in the book.
It's in the book. So exciting. And later that night we met his body man, Reggie Love. And Reggie told us that as President Obama was getting out of the car to go up to the podium, he was watching the episode, season 7. And Peace in the Middle East. You're welcome.
The Harper Plan. Yeah, there are tons of
Wingnuts are everywhere.
Yeah, they're in government, they're everywhere. Brendan Boyle, who's a friend of mine, who's a congressman from Philly, and where I'm from, and he always jokes about it with his staff too. He says, "Is today a House of Cards day or a West Wing day?"
That's great. Well, let's talk about some of these other portrayals of public service that have some roots in the West Wing, and obviously y'all spend a chunk of time talking about Hamilton, which has important linkages, but it's not alone. I mean, there's some other key portrayals of the presidency, but also just of good public service. Could you talk a little bit about that and why you think it has that ability to continue to inspire through other modes of shows like this?
I don't watch anything.
I know, I don't watch a ton either, but I did go to the exhibit today.
So did I. That's good.
Great way to close.
So there were a couple of shows, like Madam Secretary, I think was inspired. I know that Shonda Rhimes, who created Scandal, she's a big wingnut. And actually, our costume designer from West Wing was the costume designer on Scandal, and her dress is in there. And but I think Hamilton, we talk about it a lot in our book because the sort of mother of all wingnuts, I think, is Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's a big wingnut, and all the things that were in Hamilton. And he even said to us that, told us that there were some things he didn't realize till later that he had actually used from West Wing. He's like, that too, because it's just part of him. Yeah, it was just part of him. Yeah, I love that part of I love seeing that part of reading that over that part of the book. But what other shows? The Diplomat's on TV right now, and that's a lot of, the creator of that show is Deborah Kahn, and she was a writer on the West Wing. She wrote The Supremes, and she created Diplomat, and she hired a lot of...
Alice and Janney just finished doing
that's right.
ARC.
Yeah.
She's going to be the vice president.
Yeah. Well, this is a great book, and this was a great conversation, and we really appreciate y'all coming. Please join me in thanking Melissa Fitzgerald and Mary McCormack.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I think y'all are going to go off the stage, and I think
bye.
There's some books out there. And again, as always, we thank y'all for coming to Clinton Presidential Center. Conversations like this are the reason this place exists, and we are glad that y'all are living proof of the power of presidential libraries and presidential centers in communities like ours. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you next time.